Okay, we're back again this week during the Texas legislative session, and we'll continue to provide our Week Ahead in Austin virtual meeting series. This is also on Facebook, so we always provide great reach beyond just this live episode. I'm VJ Smith, board member of the El Paso Chamber, and again we have with us Texas State Representative and House Speaker Pro Tem Joe Moody. Speaker Moody, we are very grateful for your time as well as your continued level of engagement with us, our community, our region, and also for providing ideas, particularly this forum, since we did not have the El Paso Days in Austin. This has been a great way to stay engaged with you and keep up to date on the happenings in Austin. So with that, we're very grateful. Speaker Moody, and we'll give you the floor and we'll take Q&A after your report out. Thank you, sir.
Sure, absolutely. And thanks again. Well, if anyone is complaining about the legislature being slow, they can dispense with that complaint now. This past week, everything seemed to hit a much higher gear, including a committee that I serve on conducted a 12-hour committee hearing on Tuesday, which always wreaks havoc on the rest of your week. But it was certainly a lot of in-depth testimony on some civil liability issues, and so those conversations will continue. The week ahead is going to look different than the session we've had so far. For the first time this session, we will be meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So the week is expanding in our work week. Bills are starting to be voted out of committee. In fact, I had 2 bills heard and voted out at the same committee, which is something we don't typically do. Usually the committee will pend a matter. They'll hear it, take testimony, and say, okay, we'll come back to this once we allow the members to think about whether they want to support this bill. Much to my surprise, 2 of my bills were voted out immediately after they were heard, which is very nice, and I appreciated it. But it certainly was atypical, and I think that's happening in a lot of other committees too. So that's something that means that very soon we'll start to see live debate on the House floor. Also, with the passage of with federal recovery, and the president signing that yesterday, House appropriations had not planned on meeting next week, but they are now meeting next week because they've got to start diving into what those dollars look like, what types of restrictions are placed on those dollars, and how they can be utilized within this current biennium. So those things are all shifting and changing too. We saw the emergence of the pandemic response bill. It's housed in House Bill 3, and that bill was heard in committee yesterday for the first time, and it has multiple layers to it. But at the crux of it is we used in the state a disaster recovery statute for the governor to issue executive orders to shutter certain businesses, to create, try to create this framework across the state as we are navigating the pandemic. And what we heard time and time again during the pandemic is these rules were never meant for an extended period of time. They were meant for a hurricane or a tornado or a freeze, and to be able to, to provide a narrow window of relief in a very certain way. But because the pandemic hit the entire state, the only statute we had at our disposal was the disaster statute. The governor had at disposal was the disaster statute. So the core of that bill takes pandemics, epidemics, and health crises out of the disaster statute and sets them into another statute that has a little bit more constrained terms to how the executive branch can work in that environment, including a proposal that if that period lasts longer than a certain amount of time, that there are certain members of the House and the Senate that would make up a committee that could then review those orders, would have the ability to weigh in on those things as a legislative body, because otherwise we didn't have that opportunity during this last year. So those are the things that are starting to move in earnest, and things are certainly starting to pick up. And I want to do a couple of things. Certainly answer any questions, but also want to ask if there are policy areas or if they're bills that your members are interested in, uh, I'm certainly happy to extend invitations to the authors of those bills. Or if there's committees, I mean, you got a committee like pensions and investments and financial services, right? It handles a lot of business-oriented legislation. Can certainly invite the chairman. The chairman of that committee is Rafael Anchia, who actually works for a venture capital firm up in the Dallas area. And so someone that could certainly shed some light on some of those more business-minded um, uh, committee, what they're hearing and what they're seeing come through their committee. We've got about 2 or 3 different committees that handle stuff that I think impacts the business community more so than others. So happy to do that. I want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that's informative to the group. I've extended an invitation to Speaker Phelan to come whenever his Friday schedule allows him to. So we're working on that. Look forward to hosting him here with y'all at some point. Like I said, if we had done this in Austin, he probably would have come and greeted us at a breakfast at some point. So we're going to try and replicate that here. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any suggestions about who you want to hear from or policy areas that you'd like to be more up to speed on as we go through session.
Thanks. Yes, quite a few questions are coming in. I think one that's hot in light of recent issues is whether or not El Paso will see an impact from the ERCOT regulation and legislation, and knowing we're a non-ERCOT region of the state, but also knowing there are probably some impacts that we may see from that as well. Could you speak to that?
Sure. I think your answer is fairly on point. Most of those changes at the PUC or via ERCOT won't touch us, won't impact us. But I think what we have to keep an eye on is, are there concepts that are crystallized in that conversation that then deploy out to the 5 non-ERCOT areas? Because what has happened in the past, when you talk about when someone changes the law for ERCOT, for those under ERCOT, usually what the rest of us do is we look at what they changed, and then the following session come back and go, oh, we want that for our area too. We want that for our area too. And so we'll go and chase after it afterwards. Individually, there'll be 5 different bills for all those 5 regions. Entergy will have one, we'll have one, and the others will have theirs. And so my guess is you'll see that in reverse here. We'll have to monitor to see, are those things that we want for our region? And if we don't, and we don't think they're helpful given our situation, then we need to be very mindful of pushing back on this. Because if we're doing well and don't need that additional regulatory oversight, whatever that happens to be, then we need to push back on those things.
Thank you. We certainly look at potential infrastructure bills as also, an economic driver coming out of the difficult times we've been in. Can you speak to any infrastructure bill impact to our state and certainly on the transportation side more so than anything probably?
Sure. I mean, we are. I think that the line of thinking this session, at least from the folks I've talked to, is investment in infrastructure, whether that be transportation or water, or you talked about, the big conversation is around rural broadband. We call it rural broadband, but quite honestly, it impacts more than just the rural communities. It is, in a very real way, connects all of Texas, and all Texas, and so those types of conversations are now viewed through the lens of, these are investments we could make that help generate economic activity, right? So you get a return on your investment because you create economic drivers where all these projects exist. And so, yeah, I definitely think those are part of the conversation. We see it, in the world of higher education, that manifests itself in tuition revenue bonds, right? That's how we can get stuff going in terms for infrastructure for those facilities. So yeah, all of those seem to be in the mix of conversation, because as we stay, in any economic downturn, a way to start steering away is to make those investments from the public side, so that we can essentially start to soften the blow. and allow people to steer out with those opportunities. And they're projects that you need to get done anyway, and you can do them actually for at a less expensive rate in an economic situation like we're in now than you would if you kick that can down the road 2-3 years. So we'll continue to look at all those opportunities for sure.
Great. We had a question come in. You've done a lot of work and advocacy for criminal justice. So the question is, what's the latest that you're working on and seeing in that front, and especially related to lifting of COVID restrictions as part of that?
Well, probably one of the bigger bills that we're working on is what's known as the Second Look bill. Very proud that we have a bipartisan group of representatives that have authored that bill with me. And this has to do with, we had an era in this state, and I tell people this, and I said it in committee, mass incarceration is a bipartisan problem. This is something that everyone has ownership over. We were locking people up at a very high rate in the 90s in what you call the tough on crime era. And you have a population of youthful offenders because you can certify 14, 15, 16-year-olds as adults and try them and then sentence them for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So they get these 99 years to life. And so just don't have any parole eligibility until they're 45, 55 years old. So there's this huge population of what were kids that were certified or 17-year-olds in the system today that we'd like for the parole board to have a chance to look at. But right now, the law doesn't allow them to even look at them. So that's why they refer to it as a Second Look bill. We've got Bill Hammond, right, formerly with the Texas Association of Businesses, as someone who's now a champion and working on this legislation with us. There is a certain population there that deserves a second look. Doesn't mean they're going to get paroled, but it means we're going to look at maybe they have an opportunity to have life outside prison walls. So that's the biggest effort that we've had, that I'm really kind of focused on this session, because so much is being absorbed with other topics. But I think we have real momentum on that. We were able to get the bill heard quickly. I think it'll be voted out unanimously from committee with the bipartisan vote, which is always a good way to do things. That's exciting, and I look forward to doing that. In terms of COVID, the only thing that we've worked on in terms of criminal justice and COVID is there were some restrictions on PR bonds and allowing people to get out of jail if they needed to. And I really think those restrictions were misguided and probably unconstitutional. So we want to make sure that it's clear that you can't suspend people's constitutional rights in the middle of a pandemic. So we are working on that as well.
Thanks. Well, we certainly love your push for bipartisanship and how you've been able to do so much with that relationship building and the way that you work there in Austin and here. Have you seen partisanship issues as much in this session? Maybe has the pandemic slowed that down somewhat, or have the winter storms had an impact? Where do you see partisanship issues right now?
It is strange because those issues, since they impact everybody uniformly, they don't lend themselves to partisan breakdowns. Now that there'll be little flare-up conversations about masking requirements. I've seen those become very hyper partisan, which is strange to me. But people don't engage in those to a great extent. Some on kind of the far end, but hopefully now, I mean, we've seen a very rapid advancement in the vaccination process, not just in Texas but across the country. And so hopefully, as we start to recover fully, we can even get away from some of those kind of frivolous arguments we're having with one another. But yeah, the freeze obviously is that there's nothing partisan about that. That's just trying to get things right for people so that we make sure that they don't have that kind of crisis on their hands again. Haven't seen anything bubble up yet. I assume we will. There's probably no way around that. But in the Texas House, we tend to keep those things to a minimum. And even when they do come up, when we know there's an issue that's going to divide people on partisan lines, we try to do it in a way that is respectful and people have the opportunity to weigh in one way or the other.
Thanks. Yes, mask mask, there's heated debate, some partisanship, and then vaccinations. And any thoughts on? I just had a broad question here about the topic of vaccination with no specific question, but any thoughts you might have there?
Well, so the main things I hear about vaccine distribution right now, and don't hear about it as much in El Paso, but certainly hear about the rest of the state and some of the logistics of rolling it out. The other concern, and I think there was a piece written about this today, having to do with our distribution numbers in Texas. And the reason why they're lower than they should be is because we're using population data that's outdated. And so when they're calculating out what we get, the number they're basing on that on is not accurate. And so we need to do something. We're working with our federal partners to try and work on addressing that. And honestly, that would have happened under any administration because they're basing it on a number. And that number needs to be updated because our state is growing rapidly. So we need to make sure that the vaccine distribution to our state reflects our current population and not something.
Great. Well, we want these times to be quick hits, and we appreciate just 15, 20 minutes of catch up, and this has been great. I think at the top of my mind is, especially to your point about really ramping up in the last week or so with activity and whatnot at the Capitol. Do you foresee a special session on the plate?
I think we're guaranteed one. I think it's mainly because of redistricting. We're not going to get the census data back until September. Sounds like we'll be back in Austin sometime in October, in the October timeframe, because there'll be a lot of urgency around it. You got the elections around the corner in March after that. I would anticipate that we see the elections push back in 2022, much like they were in 2012. The March primaries, I think, were moved until May. It wouldn't surprise me to see something like that happen in this environment again, too.
Great. And then one last one, and we'll wrap it up on this. I want to give everybody a chance. Going back to the face mask item, in regards to the leniency on masks and allowing opening of business 100% statewide, are there any concerns to spikes?
I certainly think that concern is present. That's why I think we need to just speak uniformly about it. The pandemic's not over. We still need to be very cautious. There are rules and protocols. I'm on flights every week. I've taken take my kids to dinner. I've taken them to the movie theater. You can do these things safely and cautiously and carefully, and still be able to have some semblance of normalcy. But these next couple months are going to be key, and as vaccinations roll out and we have a little bit more available to us. So I just say, there are rules out there, guidelines out there for different types of activities. Follow them and be mindful of them. And some people are going to have different opinions about what level of risk they want to absorb or not absorb, and so that's something that we're going to have to navigate. But the more we buy into the idea that we can do these things safely and thoughtfully, then I think the quicker we can. Well, and also when your turn comes up to get a vaccine, you should get it. And so all those things combined are going to help us steer out of this as best we can.
Well, thank you so much. That wraps up this session. Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem Moody. And we're again very grateful for you and your engagement. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up with that answer.
Awesome. Look forward to seeing you all soon.
Yes. Great. Thank you.